The story of the Montana State Library is ultimately about the dedication of Montanans who understood the desires of citizens to be inspired and learn from the best information sources available to them. The 2019 Fair Library Access for All Montanans, a resolution from the Montana State Library Commission, echoes and affirms a responsibility to address the problem of access recognized from as far back as Montana's territorial days. In the 21st century, we may take for granted there has always been a state librarian, state library, and commission working toward fair access to information for all Montanans. With that in mind, this story is primarily about one of the most influential librarians in Montana history and the individual who was, in fact, the first state librarian, Mary Gertrude Buckhous. So who was Mary Gertrude Buckhous? Where was she from and what did she do? She was born south of Missoula, near the confluence of Bitterroot and Clark Fork rivers, to a Missoula pioneer family. She was the 8th of 11 children in the family, the youngest of 3 girls. Her parents were Henry and Mary Elizabeth Buckhouse, who were among the earliest area settlers, along with Mr. Patty, Mr. Higgins, Mr. Warden, and Mr. Woody. Those of you who are familiar with Missoula may know of the Buckhouse Bridge, the Highway 93 crossing of the Bitterroot River on the south side of Missoula. On September 29, 1870, the Missoula and Cedar Creek Pioneer newspaper reported, "The citizens of the Bitterroot Valley have given notice of a public meeting for the purpose of procuring the means and fixing the location of a bridge across the Bitterroot River at or near the Buckhouse Ranch." The Buckhouse family legacy includes much more than just that bridge. Education seems to have been important to this pioneer family, with Gertrude enrolling in preparatory school in 1895 and graduating with a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Montana in 1900. In 1901, Miss Buckhouse, Bachelor of Science, traveled to Illinois to complete library school. In the summer of 1902, she completed a certificate in public documents in Wisconsin and began her 29-year career as librarian of Montana State University. By all accounts, she inherited a library in need of organization and expansion to support the growing university and its diverse departments. She started with managing a relatively small collection of books and pamphlets, 11,000 and 4,000 respectively, and expanded service to the university as an associate professor when library economy was added to the courses of study in 1911. A true lifelong learner, in 1921, Miss Buckhouse completed a master's degree at Columbia University. In some of the earliest correspondence to and from Gertrude, the problem of a lack of access to library services across Montana seems to have been as important to her professional life as her day job at the university. In the earliest correspondence, Gertrude mentions that collections of books were gathered, not just to develop the university's collection, but to package and send out to locations where no libraries existed across the state. It would be a serious omission not to mention Mrs. Laura E. Howey, who could arguably also be called a state librarian of Montana. Head librarian of the Historical and Miscellaneous Department of the Montana State Library, now the Montana Historical Society, from 1898 to 1907, Laura Howey lost the position when the Attorney General ruled that only a qualified voter could serve in that position. Women did not win the right to vote in Montana until 1914. This October 1905 correspondence from Mrs. Howey to Miss Buckhouse is full of interesting advice about dealing with insects in books and insight into how traveling collections were shared between libraries and communities. While Mrs. Howey was removed from her position at the Historical and Miscellaneous Department because of her gender, Miss Buckhouse continued her work to develop the university library and expand library services around Montana. In 1927, she even traveled to France, Italy, and England to continue her studies and learn about models of library services there. Professional librarianship was a lifelong commitment, including involvement in national and state library organizations. While Granville Stewart's name may be the most historically recognizable name associated with the Montana Library Association, Gertrude Buckhous was the first unofficial president of the association and served officially as president of MLA in 1912. Through correspondence, newspaper coverage, and records of the association, it is clear that Miss Buckhouse remained active with the Library Association, particularly with legislative efforts throughout her career. She is credited with direct effort to pass the 1915 law to establish county libraries and the eventual creation of the State Library Extension Commission in 1929. Her letters, reports, and accounts of her travels around Montana on behalf of libraries give a glimpse into the energy and commitment Gertrude had to closing access gaps in Montana communities with ready access to library materials and services. It might even be argued that between Andrew Carnegie, whose funding built 17 libraries in the first decades of the 20th century, and Gertrude Buckhous's advocacy for legislation, Montana's public libraries saw tremendous growth and success during a time when war, drought, and pandemic were affecting the day-to-day lives of ordinary citizens. She wrote reports, correspondence, and histories of library services in Montana. These writings are thankfully preserved in the collection at the Historical Society Research Center. The letters between Gertrude and various librarians, American Library Association staff, Montana legislators, civic organization leaders, and colleagues from other states are evidence of the dedicated efforts and hours that Gertrude spent in pursuit of increasing access to libraries. A through line in many of these papers is serving underserved communities by leveraging county systems and state leadership. After 1915 and leading up to the 1929 passage of House Bill 321 that created the Montana State Library Extension Commission, Gertrude's correspondence acknowledges the support and success achieved, but also the struggle to provide statewide leadership and funding that would equalize access to library services. In 1929, the excitement of getting the commission law passed was tempered by the lack of an appropriation to support the new commission. For context, Montana was in the midst of local and national political turmoil, extreme drought, economic hardship, prohibition, and was literally on the brink of the Great Depression. The 1929 legislature met early in the year. Black Monday and the stock market crash came just 5 months after. Even without an appropriation, the State Library Extension Commission met in August 1929. The minutes taken by Gertrude show the small group getting down to business and setting out the important topics to tackle: officers for the commission, librarian certification, circulating libraries, school libraries, a library directory, and library services to state institutions are mentioned. The commission consisted of Miss Buckhouse, Elizabeth Ireland, Superintendent of Public Instruction, and Miss Clara Main, Lewistown Librarian. The university librarian and superintendent positions were specified in the 1929 law, with the third member appointed by the governor. With such a bold agenda outlined, it is a little sad to know that the last line of the minutes, "The meeting was adjourned," ended up being an adjournment until 1946. There's a lot more to that story, but for this chapter on Gertrude Buckhous, it is important to know a little bit about what happened in 1930 and 1931. Essentially, advocacy and lobbying for an appropriation to support the commission and library services were the main activities of Miss Buckhouse, the Montana Library Association, the Federation of Women's Clubs, and others. Unfortunate for all of us, Miss Buckhouse got sick in 1930. She refers to her illness in letters leading up to the 1931 legislative session, asking colleagues to travel to Helena to lobby, as well as other correspondents to drum up support. Even more unfortunate, Gertrude was hospitalized in May 1931 and passed away after a surgery. She was approximately 48 years old. She had served the university for 29 years as its librarian, helped found the Montana Library Association, helped establish traveling libraries and the county library law, got a state library commission started, and also served with charitable and civic organizations in Missoula during her life. The absence of Gertrude Buckhous's leadership also corresponds to the absence of activity from the State Library Extension Commission from 1931 to 1946. It is truly amazing what can be accomplished with the guidance of a committed and strong leader. I hope you have enjoyed this introduction to Gertrude Buckhous and the early history of the State Librarian, State Library, and Commission. There is certainly more to the story than what we've captured in this short overview, but the message is clear. Professional librarians with dedication, partnerships, and active communication make a huge difference in the communities and lives where public library services are provided. Libraries and the professionals who work for them create bridges between people and knowledge. It's also important to note that none of the information in this story would have been accessible without the vision and dedication of all partners who made the State Library possible: the Montana Historical Society Research Center, Mansfield Library at the University of Montana, the Montana Memory Project, and the digital collections of the State Library itself hold the stories of our past and will help us continue to tell the story of the fulfillment of a promise to meet the information needs of all Montanans. Thank you for watching.